Hey y'all, welcome to the channel. I am Task Force Bourbon. To kick off Veterans Day weekend, we're going to be celebrating Maker's Mark's newest and fourth addition to the wood finishing series. And the reason I say kicking off Veterans Day weekend using Maker's Mark as the conduit is because out of all the distilleries I visited, numerous distilleries very graciously offer veterans and military active duty discounts and the like, all the way to completely waiving the fee. But Maker's Mark does take it another step and gives you a cool little patch that says, you know, thanks and cheers for all you do, Maker's Mark, with a cool red, white, and blue wax dipping bottle. It's just kind of something neat to take home with you, especially to us veterans. So you know, I haven't reviewed these bottles yet, so I figured I'd do something also pretty special, is doing a live bottle popping for the newest BRT-01, BRT-02. We're going to talk about what that means, what is BRT, what is the wood finishing series, and a little bit about Maker's Mark. So I'm not going to delve too much in that because we've talked about Maker's Mark before, but really quickly, for a reminder to those who might be a little less familiar, Maker's Mark is what we call a wheater or a wheated bourbon, where they use wheat instead of rye as the secondary, i.e. flavoring grain, as in their mash bill or their recipe. And that recipe doesn't change. It's 70% corn, 16% red winter wheat, and 14% malted barley. So what that does is it creates a sweeter, softer, more approachable profile on the palate, and then you would see in your traditional rye more spicy type notes. And that's what made things like Weller very popular back in the day, and Maker's continues to do so. When he founded it in 1953, a part of the Beam Suntory family. So yes, the same Beam, Jim Beam family. Legend has it that William Bill Samuels Sr. was trying to come up with a mash bill for his bourbon. He had 7 options he was considering. Since good bourbon takes years to age, he opted for making bread, 7 loaves of bread instead. And then out of those options, the one that tasted the best became the mash bill that, you know, I just mentioned before. Now, the wood finishing series is really interesting and really cool to see out of a big company that's part of the Beam family, such as Maker's Mark, where they really have essentially just a few core offerings. Their standard issue Maker's Mark looks just like this, 90 proof. You see it at almost every bar around the world. They haven't really gotten into the experimental game, but that's kind of uncommon really, because you see a lot of craft distilleries all the way up to even the big guys, and Jim Beam actual included, doing a lot of experimental things, having multiple different brands and part of their profile or portfolio, excuse me. And so Maker's Mark didn't really step into that shoes until about 2010 when they introduced Maker's 46. Now I do have a cask strength offering to show you, just as an example here. It used to look like this, now it looks more like your square Maker's bottle. They changed that bottling just aesthetics as of late, but that's a Maker's 46 for you, the cask strength, mind you, just for reference. And what they did there is essentially they just added 10 French oak staves into the barrel, because as we know, bourbon, you can't add any flavoring, no honey, no nothing like that. You can finish it, which we see a lot. You have to label it a finished bourbon. And if you add anything to it, it just becomes a regular whiskey. So they sort of found a loophole for experimentation while keeping it a bourbon. They added their 10 French oak staves, right, inside their barrels of wheated Maker's Mark bourbon, aged in a limestone cellar, and voila, what you come out is Maker's 46. Now that got a lot of success, and so 9 years later, 2019, we saw the first entry into the Maker's wood finishing series line, and that here is RC6. RC6 essentially uses a unique wood stave like you saw with the French oak stave in Maker's 46. This uses that profile name. That's what actually Maker's 46 stands for. Is 46 is the stave name profile. They work with an independent stave company, and that just happened to be the name of the stave profile they used. And so the same thing here, RC6, that's essentially what that is, just a different stave profile. Next year, 2020, you saw SE4 times PR5, or by PR5, or however you want to say that X. It's basically a plus because it's essentially combining those two different unique stave profiles to make this offering. And then it gets interesting because in 2021, last year, we saw 2 come into the picture called FAEs, which stands for Fatty Acid Esters. They essentially were trying to find a way to show how the bourbon, could, with wood finishing, mind you, could show the fatty acid esters that they're so proud of because they don't chill filter on their regular offerings, and really bring those flavors out with these two offerings, FAE-01 and 02. So those are complementary, meant to sort of compare, one side of the house versus the other side of the house, and the same exact thing is going on here. And I'll just read the quote from Maker's Mark directly. This is the wood finishing series is, quote, a chance to push the flavor boundaries of our classic bourbon in truly pioneering ways. And then again, entering now into the BRT series, they say that their fourth wood finishing series release, quote, may be the easiest way to taste your way through the rickhouse. The name BRT was given to these expressions because of the influence our consistent practice of hand barrel rotation, BRT, and temperature. Some say that the T stands for temperature, but unknown for sure, but BRT definitely stands for barrel rotation, has on our whiskey process. Made to be enjoyed as a pair, BRT-01 is inspired by the tasting notes found at the hotter top of the rickhouse, and BRT-02 is inspired by tasting notes found at the cooler bottom. Together, they give people the unique opportunity to experience where the characteristics responsible for the original Maker's Marks come from, so they can reach a new level of understanding of whiskey, end quote. So as customary for all wood finishing series, they all start out cask strength, fully matured, Maker's Mark, and then they're fitted with those unique stave profiles. In BRT-01, which is on my left, your right, is made by using toasted American oak staves to, quote, dial up the flavors developed over the first 3 years of extraction. Whereas BRT-02 uses toasted French oak staves to dial up the flavors developed over its final years of reaction. Now, that's, who's to say, is this sort of a toasted Maker's 46, this one? I don't know, maybe, but, because we don't have the full picture as to the exact process, but only what we're given. Essentially, based on what we're given, we could infer that there might be similarities to a potential toasted Maker's 46 if we see something like that in the future. Maker's Mark goes on to further and explains that basic science says heat rises, meaning the top of the warehouse is where barrels experience the hottest temperature, with this causing barrels to expand. A lot of extraction takes place. With BRT-01, you'll get more barrel extractives with caramel and some toastiness added to the mix. Since the most intense heat happens at the top of the warehouse, it's less about extraction from the wood and more about the reaction of what's inside barrels at the cooler bottom. BRT-02 leans more into the darker, heavier side with notes of fruit and chocolate. We're about to find that out. I've got special Maker's 46 glasses. You can note by the logo at the bottom. I don't know if you can see those. More like this. But these came from Maker's 46. I traditionally drink out of a Glencairn glass for tastings, but it seems all but befitting to use these. So go ahead and do the fresh pop now. BRT-01 first. Some wax. Oh, that's a good one. That's the most exciting part of a bottle pop is that sound. You gotta love it. If you don't love it, you're in the wrong business. I'll put this in front. I'll go ahead and probably just pour it now so I don't make an accident. All right, that's good for now. Put that on back. Jeez. We'll go ahead and pop number 2. Put the wax to the side here. And go ahead and listen. Ooh, just as good. Makers knows what they're doing, at least in bottling, for sure. All right. Second best sound right there. The pouring, the chugging, whatever you want to call it. I call it deliciousness about to ensue. Let me put these in frame here. I'm working on the phone, so I've got a small window here. All right. So BRT-01 on my left and BRT-02 on my right. We'll go ahead and kick this off. So this is, again, as a reminder, this is the one that uses the toasted American oak staves. And it's supposed to have, what do they say, more toastiness and caramel. I don't know. I think it looks maybe a bit lighter than the right, the BRT-2. To be fair, there's not really much going on in the nose. Traditional Vanilla, you got something maybe more deep on the background, maybe like a corn caramel. Nothing crazy, but go ahead and taste it to get to the best part. Wow. I actually don't have that reaction very often. That is, it's toasted. It's a toasted oak. This is a perfect example of a toasted bourbon. I'll get another sip. So, again, your classic vanillas. For a wheater, this one does have a bit of a spicer kick to it, like maybe some black pepper. Or maybe I should say like a clove, because black pepper for me has that flavor added to that same clove note, whereas the clove's more that just the spice of the black pepper. At least in my mind, that's how I translate it. And it definitely has that sort of spice kick on the end all the way through, which is, again, something maybe you don't find on wheaters so common. But it definitely has that wheat. Wow, there's so much toasted oak. It's almost so powerful that you feel like you're getting a lot of the like age or something you might find on an older bourbon. Holy cow. That is surprising. I'm going to go ahead and just take a quick rinse. Moving to 02, you can see the difference maybe right there already. Like, look, this one's definitely lighter, right, than that one. That's a good pour, jeez. That was an accident. I usually pour this into a Glencairn, which they always look more than it actually is. Man, not a lot going on. I'm not the best for nosing, but this is I Fish for Cows says, wow, I'm hoping you refer to the flavor and the palate and the profile as opposed to the size of the glass. Yeah, it is dark, for sure. So this one definitely has a different palate profile. It tastes more matured, not in the oak sense. It has those richer, darker flavors like we're supposed to taste. What did it say? Darker, heavier side with notes of fruit and chocolate. That's what they provided us with. I gotta say, I'm kind of with it, although I got some cherry notes, which for me, Makers is sort of consistent with. But you do have that notes of fruit, at least in the sense of the cherry. Something dark is definitely going on here. Maybe it's like a thicker caramel than I saw on the left, which I didn't see so much of. Almost very little spice, especially compared to that. Yeah, this definitely, it's creamy. Number 2 is definitely creamy. It feels like it has a little bit more body than BRT-01. But I actually had a reaction of wow when I drank toasted. So I'm going to go ahead and try it again. I don't know if I personally say that these have a complementary thing going on, at least in terms of flavor profile. Now, in the sense of how they're crafted, that makes sense, right? How they pitched it to us as, the top of the floor, the bottom of the floor of the rickhouse, and the compare and contrast in that sense. But as far as flavor profile is concerned, I'm definitely not seeing many similarities. In fact, they taste very different in my eyes. Let's start with one again. Let's see if I still have that same reaction. It's just a beautiful toasted oak. That's really what it is. It's very simple. With some very spicy kind of pepper kind of stuff going on at the back. Your classic bourbon flavors like vanilla, maybe traces of caramel. But beautifully toasted oak is on here for sure, with that pepper or some kind of pepper on there. And I'll refine these tasting notes later. This is the first time I'm doing this live. I usually spend quite a bit of time, maybe a whole evening or a couple. But I just wanted to share this moment with you all. This one, the wheat comes out, you do get toasted, not on the second sip, but it's on the back side. It's more like an afterthought on the mid. You do kind of lose it because that pepper's there, or that clove, and it's really dialed down though, as compared to the first one for sure. So maybe I'm starting to get more similarities as they sit here, they open up. I know people complain about the neck pour, which is, there's some proof to back that. So, you know, maybe I should let these sit a little bit more, but that's not conducive to what we're doing tonight. So deal with it. Try number 2 again. This is a fine bourbon. I think what I'm going to say here, I'm going to leave because I'm about to finish this up. I don't want to keep everybody here too long. But this BRT number 2 is a fine bourbon. It's a good bourbon. A good bourbon I'm happy to have. I've never been let down by like the maker's single barrel offerings. It reminds me of that. It reminds me of like something you know, single barrel maker's mark that you'd find off the shelf. It's got some really cool things going on. Tastes good. It's a higher proof. I think, what is this? So BRT number 1 is 109.4 proof as compared, same. They're both 109.4 proof. That's a higher proof, especially for a lot of people. But the number 1, it's got a really fun thing going on. Even if it's, you know, doesn't have that thing that I love, like that clove on the end. I think number 1's a touch more special in that way, just because you just rewatch this and watch my reaction. Getting any weeder astringency. Let's go ahead and try that out. So I got a question here. Let's see. Again, on number 1, I don't get a lot of that wheat. There might be some softness on the middle of the palate and the profile writ large, just in general from the wheat, but I don't get a lot of the wheat flavors or astringency from that. Number 2. Maybe a splash, but I'm searching for it and I could be mistaken. I think, yeah, again, number 2 is fine. It's a little bit, you get more of that tannic oak on the touch of the end. So number 2 is definitely, I think right now, maybe after I let them sit for a while and we come back and get the more refined tasting notes, that I'll find something different. But as it stands now, I am a fan of BRT-01 over BRT-02. That's just my 2 cents as it stands now. But either way, it's a very interesting, you know, concept out of a brand we know and love, Maker's Mark. I think I would rate BRT-02 as a 4.0. And this is probably, I don't think I want to say 4.5. I want to say 4.0 as well, just in a different way, maybe a 4.25. I don't do that, so I'd have to round up or down. I think right now, and I might change this later, I think I'm at kind of equal in terms of, you know, rating-wise, but 1 is a touch better, for sure. So maybe both 4.0s. And with that, y'all, I'm really, really glad you all decided to tune in, and I hope you liked this video. If you liked it, go ahead, please, you know, share, like, subscribe, all that good fun stuff. And, you know, I'll look to do this soon again with something else. But until then, cheers, and thanks for tuning in.